All right, Tim, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and welcome everyone. As Tim mentioned, we do have, I think, a mix of both some existing Timberscan clients that may be perhaps using some portion of the system, perhaps accounts payable, and we have companies that have not used Timberscan previously or maybe never even seen it. So given that, what we're going to do today is we'll cover as much of Timberscan as we possibly can. For those that are currently using some aspect of the system, this may be a little bit of a repeat, but hopefully what you'll see as we kind of work our way through the presentation is we'll cover as much as we possibly can beyond just one particular aspect of the system. So given that, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a brief PowerPoint presentation, and because of the fact that we have a lot of things to try and squeeze into an hour's presentation, I don't want to spend a lot of time on PowerPoint. So we're going to get to the product as quickly as we possibly can. But just in the interest of kind of setting things up and describing a little bit more about Timberscan and where we're actually going to go in the presentation, I think it's important for us to just talk about a few things. So Timberscan is an enterprise content management system that was designed specifically for Sage 300 CRE. That's the way the product was built, and that today continues to be the only product that Timberscan integrates with. So it was specifically built for this, and I think you'll see as we go through the presentation a number of areas where that integration kind of comes into play, and you can see the level of detail to which we've integrated within Sage 300. So what is Timberscan? Timberscan is an enterprise content management system that is designed to allow Sage 300 CRE users the ability to create a completely paperless office. And with that, that takes on many aspects. So from an accounting perspective, where Timberscan actually started was as an accounts payable routing and approval system. That's basically where the system was created initially. It was to provide that AP routing and approval, and then once the approvals are done, have that information updated into Sage 300 CRE. Now beyond that, also within accounting, we also have an application or a product called Timberscan Capture. What Capture does is it uses optical character recognition technology to extract information from accounts payable invoices and update the accounts payable invoice entry grid automatically. So what we'll do is we're going through the presentation and we're talking about accounts payable. We're going to get to a point where I'll stop and I'll actually walk through the Capture program, and we will talk a little bit about that aspect of the system and how it works. Going beyond accounting, talking about operations. As we mentioned, Timberscan is an enterprise content management system. So it is a full document management or content management solution. So with operations, we have a product or a module called Timberscan AIM. What AIM does is it allows you to manage all of your documents, not just accounts payable invoices, but documents from within your entire organization. Things such as project management documents, property management, human resources, payroll, and on and on and on. So basically, in the same way that you're able to take AP invoices and route them for review and approval, you can do the same thing with other documents within your organization as well. So we'll touch on AIM and we'll talk a little bit about that. There's also another part of operations that we see as becoming more and more important. And it's why we're in the process of completing a product called the Timberscan Productivity Suite. Basically what this is it's an integrated cloud-based app and forms creation tool that allows you to use this system within your entire organization. So just as an example, let's say that you had a request for leave. And typically what might happen is that request for leave might get filled out manually, get submitted to someone, and then has to be reviewed by a couple of people within the organization. Well, what the Productivity Suite allows you to do is actually create that request for leave, create a form that can be integrated with Sage 300 and with Timberscan so that you can route that form around for review, and once it gets approved, the form information can update Sage 300, for example, let's say the employee file, and it also sends that particular document or that form into Timberscan as a permanent record. So we're going to take a couple of moments toward the latter part of the presentation, and we're going to talk about the productivity suite and talk about some of the possibilities there. As far as both accounting and operations, we also have a product that we're very excited about that is being introduced called Timberscan Mobile. It's a remote accounts payable invoice approval app that can be run in a completely disconnected environment. So think of it this way. Today, invoices may get routed to approvers, and they're logging into Timberscan on their desktop or using a remote connection, for example, to log in and approve their invoices. What Timberscan Mobile does is it allows you to take the information and it sends it out to an app on, for example, let's say an iPad. And then from the iPad, what you're able to do is simply bring up the invoices and you can approve them the same way on an iPad as you could on, for example, your desktop. So we're going to spend a few moments talking about Timberscan Mobile as well. Finally, just as far as history goes, Timberscan was developed in 2004. We have today over 20,000 users of the system, and we have over 1,200 companies that are using the product with Sage 300 CRE. And many of those are, as Tim mentioned at the beginning, many of those companies are Alliance Solutions customers, so we have many, from a standpoint of references or what have you, we have a number of references that we can refer to for the purpose of looking at whatever we need to from that perspective. Okay. So here's what we're going to talk about in today's presentation. We're going to talk about accounts payable invoice routing and approvals. That's where we're going to start. That's where many companies, most companies I should say, typically like to start. They want to start in accounts payable. That's especially from an accounting perspective, that's one of the biggest areas to try and address, is to kind of get a handle on or manage the accounts payable invoice routing and approval process. That's where we're going to start. We're going to talk about that first. But in the process of doing that, we're also going to cover Timberscan Capture, the optical character recognition solution. We'll also cover Timberscan AIM. So we'll talk about Timberscan from the perspective of a complete content management solution. We're going to cover Timberscan Mobile. I'll bring up and show you, what the mobile app looks like, and we'll talk about how we go about approving invoices on a mobile app. We're going to look at for a couple of minutes the productivity suite, and in the process of going through the presentation, we're also going to talk about some of the Timberscan reporting, how the integration works, and also some dashboards and those types of things. So with that, one last PowerPoint slide, and it's the accounts payable routing and approval process. So basically, when I meet with a company that is interested in looking at Timberscan, in many cases, the first thing that we're talking about is accounts payable. And usually what I will ask is, what is your current process for handling accounts payable invoices? How do they get routed to people for approval? What are the normal procedures? And I usually hear a mix of responses, but for the most part, it's a very inefficient system that they're using that in many cases is manual or is maybe scanning documents to a PDF and storing them in folders or sending them to Dropbox or something like that. So basically what Timberscan does is we handle the routing and approval process electronically throughout Timberscan, and I'll just talk about this very briefly. And then once I'm finished with this, we'll actually go into the system and we'll walk through these steps. So basically, we start at the point where invoices arrive at your door, and regardless of how you receive those invoices, what we do first is we acquire them into the Timberscan application. So it starts here, and then once the invoices and any supporting documents have been acquired, the paper can, in effect, go away. Everything that happens from that step on can all be done electronically. So once they've been acquired, the next thing that we do is we send the invoices to what we call initial data entry. Basically, we're sending them to accounts payable. Accounts payable is picking up the invoices, and they're actually entering them in the Timberscan application. What we've done in Timberscan is we have taken all of the AP invoice entry functionality that currently exists in Sage 300, and we've pulled that into Timberscan. So you're able to start entering invoices using the same data entry grid that you would if you were keying them into Sage 300. It uses all of the same controls, functionality. Everything is laid out. The entry and distribution grid looks exactly the same. And any type of warnings or what have you are going to pop up exactly the same. So you don't have to learn a new AP invoice entry functionality when you're processing invoices in Timberscan. Once the invoices have been initially entered, they get sent off to the approvers. Approvers come into Timberscan, and I've talked already about coming in on the desktop or using a mobile device or what have you, so we'll talk about the different ways that approvers go through their process of approving invoices. Once the invoices have been approved, we send them back in Timberscan to this area called Final Review. This is primarily more of a control function than anything else. So basically what's happened is that we would like, typically most companies want someone to be able to take one last look at the invoices, review them, make sure everything's been coded properly, what have you. And then they get sent seamlessly to Sage 300. It's not an import-export. It's all done using an API associated with Sage 300 where it just passes the data over to that particular application. It's as if you've already keyed them into Sage 300. They just have to be posted at that point, and then you're able to cut checks against them. And then we have a process for handling the checks as well. So we're going to cover this first, and then as we cover this, we'll be touching on some of the other applications that I talked about. And then once we're finished with this, we'll talk about kind of the full content management solution, and we'll talk about some of the other aspects of the system as well. So given that, what I'm going to do at this point is let's get out of the PowerPoint and let's get right into the product. To log into Timberscan, what you do is you select an icon on your desktop like this, and it will take you through your security credentials to a screen that looks like this. So the Timberscan master menu has a series of functions here and modules across the top. And as you select any of these, what it does is it brings up a series of apps that are related to that function or that module that you can then select any of these and work your way further into the system. So as far as navigation goes, Timberscan is a very user-friendly system. It's very easy to navigate through to the various applications that you need to go to and to work with the system from that perspective. So let's start, and we'll just talk about this very briefly for a few moments, about what happens when documents or invoices, in this case, arrive at your door. To get those invoices into Timberscan initially, what we do is choose the Acquire function, and then we choose the option Acquire Images, and it opens up our viewer. And you have a number of choices here. Invoices that you receive by way of email. You could take the attachment from Outlook, drag and drop it right to the viewer and open it here. And then you have choices as to how you want to go about separating or splitting the documents. So if this were a multi-page document, I can either manually separate these pages myself, or I can let the system split them. Let's say I know that I've just acquired a whole series of one-page invoices, for example. I can just let the system split them right now, and I don't have to do anything else. But if I want to manually separate them, it's very easy. What it does is it calls up the documents into the viewer, where I can zoom in and zoom out, for example. I can size the document with the wheel of my mouse like I'm doing now. Very easy to make it as large or small as I need to. And I have a whole series of control buttons here on the right-hand side for doing things like removing borders and hole punches, rotating the document if I need to, highlights, sticky notes, annotations. So wherever you go in Timberscan, the system is very consistent in how it works. You always have the ability to size a document with the wheel of your mouse, and you're always going to have these control buttons here on the right-hand side. Now, this is a two-page document, and the first page shows me this is Invoice 393. Over here in the thumbnail view, if I go to the second page, I see that this is a second invoice. So to split these, I can either click on this option here called Mark as New Invoice at the top of the page, or I can just right-click on the document that I want to insert a break, insert the break above, and now this is Invoice 1 and this is Invoice 2. So typically what will happen is that you'll take a whole series of documents and you'll acquire them all at one time. And then it takes just a couple of minutes to just walk through here, thumb through the various documents, and create breaks wherever you need to. So that's an example of dragging and dropping from your desktop or from an email, for example, just taking the attachment. But you can also scan documents, and you have several options when you scan. You can scan directly into the system right from your scanning device. So where it says image source, you could identify the scanner, click the scan button, and scan directly into the system. You also have the option, we have several clients that maybe are receiving invoices, for example, from multiple locations. And instead of having to send everything off to one particular location and just scan and acquire from one location, what they might do is they might scan all at the various locations, and they'll just scan them to a file, a designated file that they have determined is their AP invoice file for Timberscan. And then someone just comes into that file, opens up the file, scans through, sweeps through those various documents and opens them up, and then they open up into the viewer this way. So regardless of whether you drag and drop, you scan directly, or you scan from a file, everything starts here. The invoices and supporting documents, if you will, get acquired here. Then we identify what type of document it is. For lack of a better term right now, these are called regular invoices, but we do have a number of choices, including checks, excuse me, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and also supporting documents. Excuse me. So we'll talk about attaching supporting documents as we go as well. And then finally, what we do here is we take the invoices. Excuse me, just one second. Oh, excuse me, I apologize. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold here, and I tend to get this frog in my throat, so my apologies. But so finally, the last step in acquiring the invoices is assigning them. So if we go back and think about the PowerPoint slide that we saw just before we got into the system, that AP routing and approval process, the last step, or one of the last steps that we do after we acquire the invoice, is we assign them. So what we're going to do is we're going to send these off to Accounts Payable, and Accounts Payable is going to pick up these invoices, and they're going to start processing the invoices in Timberscan. So where it says Data Entry Group, this is your Accounts Payable person or Accounts Payable group that you want to take these invoices and start to process them. So basically, once I've assigned where they're going to go, I hit Process. The invoices come out of the viewer. They get queued up for this person or this group, and you can have multiple people here, multiple groups, it doesn't matter. And then they're picked up, and the invoices get processed in Accounts Payable from there. So that's the first step in the process of just going through and acquiring the invoices or supporting documents or any document, if you will. Okay. Invoices have been acquired. Let's go to Invoice Entry, and we'll kind of walk our way through the Invoice Entry process. So in my case, when I logged in, the system tells me I have 34 invoices that are queued up, waiting for me to go through and process. So I'm just going to go ahead and call these up, and you can shuffle, determining what invoice you want to bring up first. But I'll just bring up the first invoice that happens to be in this batch of 34. And this is an invoice for One That's Plumbing. So again, the way that the AP Invoice Entry screen is designed, you have the invoice image in the upper part of the window here, as you see, which again I can size with the wheel of my mouse. I have the data entry grid in the lower part of the window down here, and then I have these control buttons across the bottom and top. So one thing you'll notice is I start making this image larger and larger on the screen. It starts getting cut off by the data entry grid down here at the bottom. But if you have dual screens or wide screens, or you want to tile these screens, you can take this data entry grid and you can just unhook it and you can move it. So now I can have the image in full view on one side, and I can take this data entry grid and I can put it on the other side or tile it or what have you, and I can make this as large or small as I need to on the other. The other comment about the data entry grid in Timberscan, as I mentioned before, this is the exact same data entry grid that you would currently be working with in Sage 300. When you implement Timberscan, we pull all of the information from the data entry grid in Sage 300 and we embed it into Timberscan. So it's as if you're keying the invoices in using the exact same data entry grid as you would today. No need to learn a new system. So starting with vendor code, if I don't know the vendor code for Wombats Plumbing, I can use one of my function keys, like for example function key F4, to call up my vendors. Or I can just click on this list button here at the bottom of the screen, and it calls up my vendors directly out of the vendor master file in Sage 300. And it allows me to sort by vendor number, vendor name, or address, and I can put in key search letters and I can go find Wombats Plumbing. Anywhere that you're searching a master file in Timberscan, such as the vendor file, the job, the cost code, property, GL account code, for example, you're searching the master files from within Sage 300. The integration is such within Timberscan that it's almost as if Timberscan is like another module that just kind of runs alongside Sage 300. The information that gets exchanged back and forth makes it operate just like another module. And I'll show you some examples of that as we kind of go. So if I plug in the invoice number, if it's a duplicate invoice, which this one is, it's going to stop me, just like it would in Sage 300, and let me know that I've already processed an invoice 12044 for Wombats Plumbing. Well, let's say I don't remember when I did that. What I can do very quickly is I can click on this history button here at the bottom of the screen. And this calls up a report that's laid out like an Excel spreadsheet. What this report shows me is every invoice in the system related to Wombats Plumbing, regardless of its status. Some of these invoices we've already processed, we've paid them in Sage 300, and we've cut checks against them. Other invoices are somewhere still in the routing and approval process in Timberscan. So it takes everything from both systems, pulls it together on this one report, and allows me to use it just like Excel. So if I wanted to sort these columns or group them or what have you, or even export it to Excel, I can do that. What I'm doing is I'm looking for that duplicate invoice. So I see it's right here at the top of the screen. I can see the original invoice date, the original accounting date, when it was paid. And as I scroll across the screen, I can also bring up the details of how this invoice was coded. So I can see to what jobs, cost codes, properties, units, GL account codes, and what have you that this might have been associated with. The other thing that I can also do is I can bring up the original invoice image on the screen. And when you bring up this invoice image, one of the things that I'll also show you is that every time you build or you acquire an invoice into Timberscan, behind the scenes, what Timberscan does is it builds this approval page. This approval page is basically an audit log that the system tracks to tell you exactly what has happened with this invoice and when. So it tells me who received this invoice and when they received it, who entered it and when, who the approvers were, and who, in this case, was the final reviewer. So the approval page is something that Timberscan builds and runs alongside every invoice. And anytime you need to know the status of an invoice, this is just one of several ways that you can go find and determine the status of that invoice. Okay, so I see that we have a duplicate invoice. So let's go back here now to Invoice Entry. And at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll append the invoice. We'll plug in the dollar amount. We'll work our way down to the distribution grid. Okay, so what I did is I logged into a construction database. So when I did that, I'm bringing up commitments, job, cost code, and what have you. But because of the fact that we have a fairly large audience that's viewing today's presentation, it's very possible that there may be some companies that are using Timberscan, or excuse me, using Sage 300 more for property management purposes. So you may be charging your invoices to properties, units, GL account codes, and what have you. I just wanted to emphasize before I go any further that Timberscan works equally well for both. We have many clients that are using the system and they're charging their invoices to properties and GL account codes, for example. I just happen to log into a construction database, but I don't want anyone who's looking at this to think that the system only works for construction. It doesn't. It works for construction and real estate just as well. Okay, so I'm going to take this invoice in two different examples. We'll start with an invoice that's charged to a commitment, and then we'll back up and we'll see a different scenario of one without. So if I don't know the commitment offhand, I can just click on the list button. This goes directly to the job cost system and brings up all the commitments for Wombats Plumbing. I'm going to take this third commitment. One of the first things that you'll notice is that the system provides you with the warnings for any of your compliance for your insurances. So if you're using the compliance module in Sage 300, or you're updating the vendor master file with any insurance information, or you've updated the commitments with any insurance information, and any of those insurances are out of compliance, the system will automatically present you with warnings to let you know that. So you don't have to go out of the system anywhere, go run any type of a special report, or go into Sage 300 to look and see, how are we doing with Wombats Plumbing as far as their insurances. The system is going to let you know that. So again, this is just a warning. I'm going to say, okay, we're going to continue here. And now what the system does is it brought up the rest of the distribution grid. It populated the job and the cost coding category. And it did so in this case because this was a single line commitment. If this had been a multi-line commitment, what would happen is it would bring up the commitment lines listed down the screen, and I could go through each of the lines and match them up against the invoice lines accordingly. Timberscan also provides you with this summary here on the right-hand side, which is similar to a summary that you see today in Sage 300, but there is a difference here that I'll explain. You see the committed amount, and then you see two items here, one called invoiced and the other called Timberscan, and then the balance. The invoiced amount represents what has already been processed and we have already posted, so we've updated job cost and GL, what have you, with that amount of money. The Timberscan amount is what has not been posted yet. So they are invoices that we have entered or processed, and they're working their way through the routing and approval scenarios, but they have not updated Sage 300 job cost and GL. So it takes the combination of these two, the posted and the unposted, to determine the balance. And if the balance goes negative, it will highlight that on the screen to let you know. The other thing that I think is very neat about these particular fields is that you can hover the mouse on any of these fields, and it will call up a tooltip that's associated with that field. For example, if I hover the mouse on the commitment, I can see the original committed amount, any change orders, what's been paid, what's been invoiced in the balance. If I hover the mouse on the job, I can see the revised contract amount of the job, what's been billed in the balance. And if I hover the mouse on the cost code, I can see what's been invoiced against this cost code. So once again, everything is self-contained within Timberscan. I don't necessarily need to go out of here, go into job cost, or search around, run any type of special job cost report necessarily. A lot of this information is right here at my fingertips if I need it. And now if I'm finished with this invoice, what I can do is just go ahead and accept it, and Timberscan will send that invoice off to the approvers based on your business rules. So one of the things that we do when you're setting up Timberscan and you're kind of working through the implementation, if you will, is we go through and we start establishing these business rules. And the business rules are basically designed to mimic what you do today manually, but take it out of the manual process and make it electronic. So what I mean by that is if you said, well, typically what we do is, we would send this invoice off to the project manager on job 03002. So basically we'll just set that up as a business rule. You go ahead and accept the invoice, and then this invoice goes off to the project manager for that job without you having to think about, where do I need to route this? The system will do it for you automatically. You could say, well, we have multiple approvers. Fine. You can set up as many approvers as needed for a particular scenario. You could say, well, we want to route invoices to a higher level of approval if it's greater than a certain dollar amount. You can do that as well. So you can set up thresholds that will allow you to do those types of things. So the business rules will help dictate where the invoices get routed. So you're not having to spend your time here in accounts payable constantly thinking about, okay, where does this need to go? The system can basically kind of automate a lot of that for you. Okay, so that's processing an invoice against a commitment. Let's back up for just a second and talk about a different scenario where maybe I don't have a commitment, but maybe I'm going to go ahead and charge it to this job. Now, in that case, maybe that's the only thing that I want to do at this point. I want to take this invoice and get it off to the approvers and let them go through and code it. I don't want to have to put in the cost coding here on the accounting side. I want the approvers to do it on their end. So the beauty here is that I can go ahead and accept the invoice just like it is and send it off to the approvers, and then they're going to come into the system and they're going to go through and code it. And you can set up the system so that if I were an approver and I went in and started looking at this invoice and decided to approve it without coding it, you can restrict that from happening. So you can say, nope, you're going to have to go through and code it. We can't let you approve it without you coding it. Or you can set up a different scenario where you say, no, we don't want our approvers coding. We just want them to review and approve. You can set it up to do that as well. Okay, very quickly, because I know we have a lot to cover here, just a few other things. You can do joint checks, joint payees. You can attach supporting documents. So if I click on the supporting documents tab, the system goes out and searches and finds anything, for example, receiving tickets, purchase orders, whatever it might be, packing slips that might be associated with Wombats Plumbing or with job 03001 in this case. And when anything that it finds, it brings up in the supporting documents queue, and then I'm able to go through and select any of these documents and just attach them to the invoice if I need to. So what that does is that allows me, so I don't have to take, for example, receiving tickets or a purchase order, for example, that maybe we have prior to the invoice arriving. I don't have to put those aside and then scan them all in at the same time that I scan in the invoice. I can scan them separately if I want to and have them queued up waiting for the invoice to arrive if I need to. All right, we talked about the history option. You can also email directly out of the system. So instead of me having to go out to Outlook, I could email right from here. And then you can also put sticky notes, highlights, annotations, and you can also put comments which will not basically stick to the invoice. So if I put a comment in, it will reside with the invoice in Timberscan, and anyone that opens up the invoice, they'll see the comment first. But what it does is it allows me to put in the comment without having to add a whole bunch of sticky notes that are going to clutter up the invoice. Okay, so I process the invoices. When I'm finished with the batch, it sends an email notification to the approvers and lets them know that they have invoices to approve. So if I processed all 34 invoices and then I finished with the batch, and let's say 20 of those 34 invoices went to the same person, it's not going to send that person 20 emails. It will send that person one email when I'm finished with the batch summarizing the invoices that I routed to that person. Okay, so that's invoice entry. Again, I think the beauty here is how you can access information very quickly, very easily, and also the way that it's laid out to function exactly like it does in Sage 300. So before I go over to the approval side, what I'm going to do at this point is we're going to talk about Timberscan Capture because it runs hand in hand with invoice entry. So the way Timberscan Capture works is this. Basically, you can take any vendor's invoice, and once you acquire that invoice into Timberscan, you have the opportunity to set up templates. And the template will allow you to identify certain criteria on an invoice and retrieve it. So here's an example. I took this vendor's invoice. I acquired it. I moved it to the template viewer. And then I have this menu that allows me to identify certain criteria that I want to be able to select and highlight so that I can grab information from that particular zone, if you will, on that invoice. So for example, invoice number. I took the blue highlighter, I moved it here, and this thing, basically you can just move this to wherever you need to, and you can size that particular blue highlighter to the size of the box, however big or small you need it to be, so that it fits. The system will ask you where you want to read the information from in the box, and then it reads the result back to you. I did the same thing with invoice date. balance due, which is down here in green, I highlighted. And then also I highlighted the description. If you have a vendor that has your job number or your commitment number on the document, you can highlight and retrieve those fields. Now, with every template that you set up, also able to do, in addition to what you can highlight and retrieve from the invoice document itself, you can also go into this option called Invoice Coding, and you can set up additional defaults. So for example, what I said was I wanted to put in their vendor code in Invoice Coding, so that every time I process an invoice for Beaverton Sand and Gravel, not only is it going to populate these fields that I highlighted, but it's also going to populate the vendor code. And I said, let's default it to this job and cost code. So that's basically a kind of a brief, quick overview of the templates and how you go through and set up the templates. Now, what I'll also mention is, especially for property management, is that, in that case, you might have scenarios where you get, for example, multiple invoices from, let's say, a utility vendor because they're charging different, properties or units. So in that case, what you can do is you can just set up one template, but you can have multiple profiles. And from that one template, so you're not having to go through and set up a different template for each, each unit, for example, or each property that I want to charge that particular template to. You set up one template, and then you have multiple profiles that are broken up by an identifier. So in this case, I have this, vendor, National Grid, a utility vendor, that's going to send me multiple invoices for different properties. So I'm going to highlight everything on the invoice the same way every time. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to separate my templates by this account number. That's my identifier in this case. And depending on what the account number is, I will charge it to a different GL account prefix. So basically what we're saying here is that you can take one template, you can charge it to multiple different units, if you will, or different whatever it is, separated by an identifier. Okay, so that's the concept of taking your invoices, setting up the templates, and then once you do that, what happens is that you go out, you start acquiring invoices, and if it recognizes the template for that vendor, it will just move it directly to Invoice Entry, and it will look like this. Okay, so here's the first invoice. This is the utility vendor I was talking about. Notice how everything's color-coded, just like it was when I set it up. I'm able to quickly look at the color codes, and I can see, where the information has populated. And in this case, based on this account number, I charge this GL prefix. Now, if we go to the next invoice, which is the one for Beaverton Sand and Gravel, this happens to have a compliance issue, which is going to pop up first. And then, again, it's color-coded, just like it was when I set it up in the template originally. All the information has been populated here, including the default vendor and the job and cost code. So you can see how this has the ability to dramatically streamline the process of invoice entry when it comes to processing AEP invoices. Now, I know some companies will say, well, we have multiple distributions, it gets charged to different jobs, cost codes, whatever it might be. But think about the fact that if you can get all of this populated and you're already down here and you're starting to code, you've eliminated all of the keystrokes here, this can still be very efficient. You may have some scenarios where you're able to actually populate just about everything on this screen and just go ahead and accept the invoice and off it goes. So that's how the capture program works. Just a couple things I'll also mention. You can always override any of these fields that it defaults in. It doesn't stop you from doing that. The other thing that happens is that when you acquire invoices, it's going to recognize the template, and then for those invoices, so if you took, let's say, a batch of, let's say you scanned in or acquired 50 invoices all at one time, And let's say of those 50, let's say 30 of them already have a template set up. The other 20 don't. Those 20 vendor invoices where there's not a template, it just shows up in unrecognized documents. And then what you're able to do is just go through and call up that particular document. And you can either define a template if you want, you can use an existing template, or you can just move it directly to Invoice Entry, and you can just start keying it in just like that if you want. The other thing that we've just added to Timberscan Capture is the process of using what we call PDF text layering. So when you look at a template now, we're making the process of being able to recognize the information much easier by reading the PDF text. So you can acquire documents as PDFs, which is the cleanest way, if you will, to be able to read it from this perspective. And then it can read and retrieve the information right off the text off of the PDF, and it becomes a very clean read, much cleaner than if you're trying to read a document from, let's say, a dot matrix printer, for example. Okay, so that's the capture program. So let's do this now. Let's do a quick check on time. All right, we've got about 12 minutes or so before we've got to kind of wrap up. So I'm going to have to kind of quickly move through here. I'm going to log in as an approver, and we'll talk about this rather quickly, but I just want to make sure that we cover all the key aspects of approving. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go directly into the approval screen. The system tells me I have 12 invoices to approve. I'm going to call these up. There are ways that you can sort and filter to grab specific invoices that are routed to me, but in this case I'll just default and let the system call up whatever the first invoice is that's routed to me. And now the first things you'll notice is this. First of all, someone did put a comment on this invoice before they sent it to me. So the comment or the note pops up first. That's the first thing that I see. I say, okay, good, I see that. Second thing is, remember when we were entering this invoice in AP, there was a compliance issue. And if that has not been corrected when it gets to the approver is going to see this too. Now maybe at this end, maybe what I want to do as an approver, I want to take action here. So maybe what I'm going to do is put a sticky note on this invoice and say that we can't process the invoice due to that workers' comp issue. And then maybe what I'll do is email it. I'm going to email it right back to Wombat's Plumbing so I can send that invoice, I can send the email right out of Timberscan, and I can attach the invoice as a PDF attachment and send it along with it. I could put the invoice on hold, or I can reject the invoice. If you do either of these two things, you'll be forced to put a reason in as to why you're rejecting it or why you're placing it on hold. So that way, if anyone else needs to know what the status of the invoice is, they can see it. You can also reject back to previous people. So when you're rejecting, let's say I'm the third person that's approving this invoice. So 2 people prior to me already saw it, they approved it, it got to me. I want to reject it. But I don't want to reject it and send it all the way back to where it originated in accounting. I just want to reject it back to the previous person. Or maybe to the 2 people back or something like that. So depending on the number of people that have already seen and approved this invoice, you can select and send it back to wherever you need to go. You can, in this case, the invoice came to me. It's not completely coded, so I'm going to go ahead and code it. I'm going to call up my cost codes, and I'm going to call up my categories. And the system's going to give me this optional warning in this case, letting me know the amount I'm invoicing exceeds the revised estimate plus tolerance for material. So again, that level of integration that's constantly doing this check and balance back and forth between, Timberscan and job cost, or Timberscan and, PJ, or whatever it might be. It's constantly pulling this information and presenting it to me right here on the screen. I can hover the mouse in these fields like we saw before, and I can see what the status is. Now let's say that I'm looking here, and maybe I decide I would like to get a little bit more detail on what we've done so far as invoicing against this job. what I can do is I can run this job report right here from the approval screen. And what the job report does is, again, it's laid out like an Excel spreadsheet, and it shows me every invoice that we have processed against job 03001 in this case. And again, you can use this just like Excel. You can sort and group columns. So I've got every invoice in here related to that job with a great level of detail. I show all the commitment information, the GL account codes. I see the accounting date, when it was, if there were any discounts, when it was paid, job, cost code, category, what have you. When I get over here to the other side, I also have all of the invoice images. And why this is important is this. If you're doing any time and material or cost plus billings, and you need to compile the backup, so you need to provide all the AP invoices for a T&M or cost plus bill, you can generate a report right from this grid, and you can determine, do I want to be able to pull that backup and attach it to a, let's say, a cost report to send off to say this is the backup for that T&M or cost plus billing. Or, I'm doing a roll-up on a loan draw or something like that. So right from here, I can generate this. And then what it will do, if I want to generate that cost report, it sends out a report that looks like this. Shows me the jobs and the cost codes. And as I scroll down through the pages, I can also attach those invoice images. So this is a very valuable aspect, a very valuable part of the system where I'm able to compile and produce this backup without me having to manually go through and compile all that information. Okay, interest of time, we're going to quickly go through here. Again, I can approve it. I'm on to my next invoice. I can also put the invoice on hold for payment if I want. So this option, hold in AP, allows me to say, I'm going to go ahead and approve it. It can actually get processed and posted in Sage 300, but we're not going to cut a check against it until someone takes it off of hold for payment. Okay, that's one way that you can approve invoices in Timberscan. Second thing you could do is you can bring the invoices up in a dashboard view. So maybe what I want to do is I want to come in, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the dashboard. And from the dashboard, I'm going to look and see what's waiting for my approval. And then I can isolate. So I could say, just show me the invoices for the Northwest Food Warehouse job. I've got 5 invoices, about $10,000 worth of payables. And if I click on the tab, I can actually open up and see those documents in card view like this. Or I can bring them up in grid view. And if I have enough information right here on the screen, I could just technically go down through, and this is all based on security, by the way. I could technically go down through and just approve these, or if I need to edit any of these or see the comments, I can do that. So what this does is this allows you to see things basically kind of in an overview format first, and then I can just drill in and approve as needed as we go. Okay, the third option, which we are introducing, is Timberscan Mobile. So let's see if we can bring this up on the screen. We can. Okay. So what I've done is I've brought up my iPad, and we'll ignore the Elmo app here for a second. Let's slide over here to Timberscan. And basically what you see here is I have an app that by simply selecting, I can go ahead and call up my invoices on the app. And then from here, what I'm able to do is I'm able to go through and select any of these invoices and bring them up on the screen. And I have, in essence, the same functionality from this mobile app that I have from my desktop. I can approve it. I can put it on hold. I can reject it. I can put it on hold for payment. So I have all of that functionality here. I can take, and select, for example, my jobs and cost codes because it downloads all of this to the app as well. I could, put this one on hold, and of course I'm going to have to put a reason in, so I can do that as well. And I can even annotate or draw on the document if I need to. So basically the idea here is that, these invoices get sent off to me, and I can either use the desktop or I can come in using this, this mobile app, which, you know, maybe I'm on an airplane that doesn't have a Wi-Fi connection. I'm still able to go through and get my invoice approvals done. And then when I walk off the plane, go into the airport, and there is a Wi-Fi connection available, the system will automatically take that information and it will sync it back to the server, sending those approved invoices back. So it can be run completely disconnected, and it doesn't require Citrix or Terminal Server. It's all done through a, you know, a browser, a mobile app, if you will. Okay, so that's the mobile application. Let's go back here and see what happens once the invoices have been processed and they've gotten posted and we've cut checks against them. What Timberscan allows you to do is to go through and match up that check information with the invoices. There are several different ways that you can do that. But ultimately, the bottom line is that once I've processed a batch of checks, I'm able to go into Sage 300, and I could be, for example, in job cost, I could be in general ledger, I could be in accounts payable, and if I wanted to, in this case, let's drill down to invoice detail, look at my AP transactions, and I'll look at Baldwin Painting, for example. Look at invoice 123. See this paperclip attachment that's highlighted. I'm just going to go ahead and open this up. And it calls up for me the Baldwin Painting invoice. This is our approval page that we talked about before. Any supporting documents, in this case a purchase order. And here's the check that we cut against that particular invoice. So Timberscan takes all of that information, puts it together in a packet, and it's automatically available to you in Sage 300. It's not like I had to do anything, you know, to run any type of an executable program to be able to make it update into Sage 300. The system did it for me automatically. So it gives you that flexibility of being able to see the detail here as well as over in Timberscan. Okay, obviously there's more that I could show you from that perspective, but in the interest of time, we are kind of running short here, so I just want to make sure we get to a couple of other things. Let's talk about Timberscan from a full content management solution. So I mentioned that, you know, we've kind of talked about AP. I mentioned at the outset that we have a module called Timberscan AIM. What AIM does is it allows you to set up any document that you want in the system and set up any associated indexes to that particular document. So just to show you very quickly here, basically what I'm able to do is at an administrative level, I can go in and I can set up my document types and my indexes for any document that I want to manage in the system. I'll show you that very quickly here. So setting up document types, these are all user definable. So I can set up whatever document type that I want, and I can also set up any associated indexes to that document type. When I do this, these are again user definable, and you can add whatever indexes that you want. We do have a library that we provide you that you can just pick and choose from. Many of these particular fields have a related field in Sage 300 already. But if I just wanted to go out and create a new index for myself, I can. So what are we doing here? What we're doing is this. We're trying to eliminate the process of having you use the Windows file system, if you will, to store your documents. Because yes, it's very easy for you to be able to just use the file tree and go out here and say, you know, I just want to, you know, drag a document from my desktop into this particular folder and save it. But it becomes very inefficient because you can't report on this. It's not integrated with Sage 300. It can be very difficult to go search and find those documents. So what we're doing in Timberscan is we're allowing you to set up document types and associated indexes so that you're able to go through and save those documents and index them into the system and save them in Timberscan, where you also have the ability to use the routing and approval function for any of those documents. So in this change order that I was looking at, I can set up workflows, and I can set up routing rules that are very similar to the routing rules that you could set up for an AP invoice. And then I can route this change order around for review and approval. And I can say that it's based on the fact of what job it's associated with. If it's, for job 03001, then I want to send it off to these people. If it's for job 03002, somebody else. So you set up document types and indexes, and you set up workflow routing rules for any of your documents. And then once that part is done, you're able to save those documents in the system. You have any of your workflows, any document that has a workflow, it routes documents to various people where they can call them up, and they can go through the review and approval process just as if they were approving an AP invoice. You can do the same thing with any other document. You could add pages to it, add notes, email it off to someone right from here. So it has the whole routing and approval aspect for all of your documents. You can just drag and drop a document right here and index it, but once those documents have been indexed, and oh, by the way, you can also save them in their native format. So if I wanted to save Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PDFs, whatever it might be, it will save them in their native format and allow you to manage them in their native format. Ultimately, what I'm able to do here is use the flexible search criteria to go out and find my documents at a moment's notice if I needed to. So I'm in the middle of a job audit, and I want to be able to go out and find all of my documents for job 03001. Very quickly, it goes and finds those documents. I can package them up. I can select whatever documents I need to. I can view any of the documents if I need to on the screen. I can edit any of the documents, and then from here I could route them if I wanted to on the fly to someone or email them. I can see how they're coded. So you've got all of this capability for managing and storing all of your documents. And anytime you build a search, you can build conditions around that search. Okay, I apologize. I know we're really bumping up against the top of the hour, and I appreciate everyone's time. I will say that if you'd like more detail on anything that we've covered, and we didn't even get to the productivity suite, which I wanted to spend a little bit of time showing you how you can go through and you can set up your own forms, and you can set up your own documents, for example, and you can take documents and kind of fill them out and process them and then submit them, and all of that information can be attached to both Timberscan and to Sage 300. But if you'd like more information on any of this, we're more than happy to do a deeper dive and spend time in kind of a one-on-one. And we also do weekly webinars. The weekly webinars take place every Wednesday. We do them at 10 and at 4 Eastern Time. So with that, again, I know we're right up against the hour, so I'm going to stop. We said we wanted to spend a few minutes to give anyone time for any questions that they might have. So let's go ahead and open it up now at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Okay, everybody, we still have a lot of people